Hello and welcome to Mambel Technology Group. In this series, we will be talking about VMs and how to create VMs. And we'll go all the way on how to create domain controllers, add computers to domain controllers, add a cluster, and also to create our always on availability group. So before you create a virtual machine, let's actually go and understand what is a virtual machine and how it works. So virtual machine comes from the concept of virtualization. Virtualization is basically a process of creating a software-based or a virtual version of something. In the case of virtual machines, it's just a computer that is created on another computer. As easy as that. And as you can see from this diagram down here, you can see we have hardware here, and on this hardware we have a couple of virtual machines that are created on this. So basically these virtual machines sit and derive its resources from the physical hardware, like your personal laptop that you have home or any other hardware. Now, for you to be able to create a virtual machine, you first of all need what is called a hypervisor, because a virtual machine runs on a hypervisor. And let's go and try to understand the different terminologies when it comes to virtual machine. So here you have a host. A host is that physical computer on which you build your virtual machines. For example, you can see on this diagram right here, this computer down here is the host. It has disks, it has RAM, that is memory, it has CPU and everything. And on this host, you can spin up one, two, three virtual machines, which means all these VMs, these are separate operating systems that are running independently of this physical machine. This simply means that you can create a virtual machine that runs Windows operating system here. You can create another virtual machine that runs Linux operating system here. And you can create a different machine that runs something else, maybe Mac OS and what have you. But at the end of the day, all these virtual machines depend on the physical resources that this physical server provide to them, which means if you don't have enough resources here, your virtual machines will be suffering. But at the end of the day, once these virtual machines are up and running, they are independent. They operate independently of this one, right? So they can run parallel to your physical machine. And what is the guest? The guest is basically a separate or independent instance of an operating system and an application that runs on that operating system, just like we saw here. Now, since we have seen what is a virtual machine, we've seen what is virtualization, let's try to see the characteristics of virtualization. And virtualization is really simple and easy to implement. First of the characteristics is partitioning, which means you can have multiple virtual machines present on a single physical system during this virtualization. And this kind of allows you to separate your workload. And the benefit you get here is that you don't need to buy a different operating system. You don't need to buy a different physical machine, right? So before virtualization, what you would do if you had a requirement to have different applications running on different servers, then what happens at that time? You will definitely need to buy a separate operating system that will be running maybe an application that is maybe a Windows-based application, right? And then another virtual machine, you will need to buy it, and that is costing a lot of money. And then the cost of maintenance is very high too. So virtualization kind of comes in to, leverage these costs and help us minimize costs by just having one physical server on which we can spin up our virtual machines. Isolation. This is another characteristics of a virtual machine. It simply means that once you have these virtual machines up and running, basically what happens is that it is isolated from each other. So in as much as they all derive resources from the physical server, they are independent and isolated from each other, which means if you turn off this virtual machine, this one will still be up and running. And if any of these ones goes off, it has nothing to do with the other virtual machine. As long as there is enough resources on the physical machine to support each and every one of these virtual machines, they are isolated from each other. Now, I mentioned earlier that for you to be able to virtualize your environment, you will need to make use of what is called a hypervisor. What is a hypervisor? It is basically a piece of software that runs on top of a hardware system to assist in the creation and management of virtual machines. It's also it's also known as a virtual machine monitor since it lets you allocate physical resources to your virtual machine. So basically, what it's saying here, a hypervisor, sorry, is basically software that separates your physical computer from the virtual machines. It means you have your physical computer, you have your hardware, and then you have a hypervisor. A hypervisor is that layer that provides you with the possibility to now spin up different operating systems. And with this, there are two types of hypervisor. So with the diagram here on the left, you can see that we have our physical hardware here, which is a physical machine. And then in between or on top of the physical machine, we have what is called a hypervisor. And it is this hypervisor that creates the layer on which now you spin up your virtual machines. And basically, there are two types of hypervisor. First type of hypervisor is called the type 1 hypervisor or the bare metal hypervisor. This type of hypervisor is installed directly on your host system. It means that it is sitting directly on your hardware, right? It does not have an operating system, so no operating system is present here. It doesn't need an operating system for it to be installed, so it sits on your hardware, and it is either called a type 1 or bare metal because it sits on your bare metal. And with this, you will definitely need something that is called virtual machine management console to be able to have an interface on which you can manage your virtual machine. And some of these type of hypervisors, for example, are the Citrix, Oracle VM, and the rest. So they sit on your virtual machine, on your physical server. Now, the type 2 hypervisor basically is the type of hypervisor that is called um, a hosted hypervisor. And basically, the type 2 hypervisor behaves like a software application, right, that is installed on top of an existing operating system, which means if you have, for example, a Windows uh, 12 operating system, a Windows 10 operating system, sorry, or Windows 11 operating system, you can actually go on that operating system and then you enable or you install your hypervisor. And the hypervisor now that sits on an already existing operating system gives you now that layer for you to be able to spin up and create your virtual machines. So without any much talk, let's go ahead and create our virtual machine. So see you in the next video, how to create a virtual machine. Thank you.